Welcome, class, to Major Profits. I am your professor, Juan Sancho, uh, professor of Legacy Ministry College. And today we're going to be talking about uh, prophecies against foreign nations, but also the restoration of Israel through the exiles. Ezekiel from 25 to 2032. It deals with the prophecies of Egypt and Tyre. Egypt and Tyre deals with the prophecy of Egypt and Tyre. And there is, just to reframe, you're going to be mentioning Daniel. So here, show you where we're at right now. Ezekiel 25 deals with Aster there, and then Ezekiel 33 deals with the actual judgment here. The actual judgment where the prophecy is actually fulfilled. You see vision dry bones here, then you see on here there. But just to make it simple, I'm going to show this timeline here. Okay, so right here you see right here. So right here you see parables, interpretation, difficulties here. So one of the main messages of this section is Israel now turning his wrath from Israel and turning his wrath from Israel to Israel and turning it back to now him trying to restore Israel. And one of the key things with Israel here is verse 36, 24, 20, 26. I will give you a new heart. So we're going through 25 to chapter 25 to 39, which is about 15 chapters. 15 chapters today. But it deals with this the concept of God's heart behind the God's heart behind this is he wants to restore Israel. He wants to restore Israel because God's intent was to correct Israel's behavior, to turn their hearts from their idols, from the adultery, from their adultery. And once they turned their hearts, they were able to now go back into relationship. God was able to restore their hearts. And even though this application has a dual meaning for Israel's day and a meaning for Israel now for Israel. Today, we see the heart of it is what this verse says in Isaiah. Ezekiel. I'll give you a new heart. I'll put a new spirit in you. I'll take the heart of stone out of your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. The reason behind it, God's intent was for Israel to be restored. And then it says, thus says the Lord, on that day I will cleanse you for all iniquities. When we read these verses, right, thus says the Lord, on that day I will cleanse you for all your iniquities. I also am able to dwell in the cities, and ruins shall be rebuilt. The desolate land shall be tilled until lying desolate in the sight all past. And they will say, the land was desolate, and became like the garden. The wasted, the desolate, ruined city are now fortified, inhabited. When we read this chapter, right, this is the heart of this section. It's God's now in the business of restore. Jeremiah was judgment. Isaiah, there's judgments or restoration. But here in Ezekiel, we see judgment. And now the passage is turning from judgment to now the judgment is going to the false nations. And Israel, it has lost their national identity and is able now to recapture the identity by a future promise. But now as he's saying that he's going to restore them as a people, as a nation. So you see here a purpose, right? So you see God's glory, how many glory? You see departing glory, right? The glory departs, the glory is in Babylon, right? You see the throne, which people think is a UFO. It's not a UFO, it's the throne of God, God's presence is dwelling in Babylon. And now the keys to Israel, key word here is restoration of Israel. And I'm going to put in Bible Hub to just go over the two overviews of Ezekiel, because I want to understand, but there to be the understanding that God is in business to restore. And right here we'll see here Ezekiel 133. I'm gonna unpin myself here. Here. And we're gonna go over Ezekiel 133, and then I'll go to the next here. And just want to do the overview to understand, God dwells with his people. This verse has been reality in the Old Testament. You see, God's not limited by geographical places. The God always goes with his people, and he desires the heart of people. So here you go.
Ezekiel was a priest who had been living in Jerusalem during the first Babylonian attack on the city. And they spared the city, but they took a first wave of Israelite prisoners and hauled them off into exile, and Ezekiel was among them. So the book begins 5 years after all that, and Ezekiel is sitting on the bank of an irrigation canal near his Israelite refugee camp, and it's his 30th birthday, no less, the year that he would have been installed as a priest in Jerusalem. And then all of a sudden, Ezekiel has this vision. He sees a storm cloud approaching, and then inside the cloud are 4 strange creatures that have wings outstretched and touching each other. And these creatures each had 4 faces. And then he saw 4 wheels, one by each creature. And then he saw that the wings of the creatures were supporting this dazzling platform. And then on that platform is a throne. And then sitting on that throne is this human-like creature, glowing and shrouded in fire. And then all of a sudden Ezekiel realizes what he he's seeing. He calls it the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. It's God riding his royal throne chariot. Now, the word glory, in Hebrew, it's kabod. It means heavy or significant. The biblical authors use this word to describe the physical appearance and manifestation of God's significance when he shows up in person. These images in the vision, they're very similar to what happened when God appeared on Mount Sinai in the book of Exodus. And it's also very similar to the depictions of God's presence over the Ark of the Covenant. And that's actually the most shocking thing about Ezekiel's vision. What is God's glory doing in Babylon? It's supposed to be above the Ark of the Covenant in the temple in Jerusalem. And so the first section of the book opens to explore that question as Ezekiel begins to accuse Israel of rebellion. So God first speaks to Ezekiel from the throne chariot, and he commissions him as a prophet. Ezekiel is to accuse Israel of breaking their covenant agreement with God in a couple ways. Israel has given their allegiance to other gods and has been worshiping idols, and this has all led to rampant social injustice, violence, and so as a result, God appoints Ezekiel to warn the people. The first Babylonian attack that took Ezekiel into exile is going to be matched by another, and Jerusalem, its temple, all face imminent destruction. So Ezekiel uses words and more to get his message across. He also performs sign acts. These were a form of street theater. Ezekiel would go out in public and start behaving in these really bizarre ways that were like parables of his prophetic message. So he was supposed to build a tiny model of Jerusalem and then stage an attack on it. Or he was to shave off all of his hair and then chop it up with a sword. Or the most extreme, he was to play the role of the scapegoat on the Day of Atonement. And he would lay on his side for over a year, eating food cooked over poop, as a sign of the nasty food that people will have to eat during the siege of Jerusalem. And perhaps the most disheartening thing of all is the bad news God gave Ezekiel that no one was going to listen to him. Israel would reject him because of their rebellious and hard heart. And this recalls Moses' description of the people after the wilderness rebellions, when he predicted that exile would one day happen, and Ezekiel had the unfortunate privilege of seeing it all come to pass. And so a dismayed Ezekiel, he begins to perform his task. And after about a year, he has another vision. This one is about the temple. He goes on this virtual tour of the temple, and he sees what's happening there in his absence, and it is not good. In the outer courtyard, in front of the temple, he sees this large idol statue. And then he sees the elders of Israel worshiping other gods, both outside and inside the temple. And then he sees the women of Israel. They're worshiping a Babylonian god named Tammuz, and the vision ends with God's glorious throne chariot moving up and away from the temple. It's leaving, going east, headed towards Babylon. And so in chapter 11, we come to see why and how God's glory appeared to Ezekiel there in Babylon. Israel's idolatry and their covenant violations, it's become so blatant and offensive that God has left his temple. They've driven him away, and he consigns it to destruction. But God hasn't abandoned his people. Rather, he goes into exile with them. And so at the end of this vision in chapter 11, God promises that he will return a remnant of Israel back to the land, and he'll transform them by removing their heart of stone and giving them a new, soft heart of flesh, so that they can love and truly follow their God after all. This is a small glimmer of hope, and it's quickly submerged under the reality of the imminent destruction. But chapter 11 is a key transition, and it helps us understand how the rest of the book has been designed. So the next three sections are all announcements of God's judgment, first on Israel, then on the nations around Israel, and then on Jerusalem itself. But then after that, the hopeful conclusion of chapter 11 gets developed in the final three sections of the book. First, hope for Israel, then for the nations, and then for all creation. Chapters 12 to 24 focus on God's judgment coming to Israel. And this is a diverse collection of poems and essays. And here Ezekiel shows his fondness for parable and allegory. So he depicts Israel as a burnt, useless stick, or as a rebellious wife, or as a dangerous, raging lion that gets captured, or as two promiscuous sisters. These are all depictions of Israel's senseless rebellion and idolatry that results in their ruin. In this section, Ezekiel also acts like a lawyer. He begins arguing the case that, first of all, Jerusalem's destruction is truly deserved after centuries of covenant violation. And that even if the most righteous people in the world, like Noah or Daniel or Job, were alive and praying for God to spare Israel, God would not accept their prayers. It's far too late. And so God's goodness actually demands that he bring justice on this generation of Israel. The exile has become inevitable. They've reached the point of no return. Following this, Ezekiel focuses first on the nations immediately around Israel, and then on the two most powerful states in the region, Egypt and then Tyre. Israel has allied with these nations and adopted their gods and their idols, and so God accuses the kings of Tyre and Egypt for arrogantly viewing themselves as gods who get to define right and wrong on their own terms. And God holds these kings accountable for their pride, and he announces that he will use Babylon to bring them down. They will face God's justice along with everybody else. Following these really intense sections is a short story in chapter 33. Ezekiel's met by a refugee who's just arrived from Jerusalem, and he gives him the report that Babylon has attacked the city of Jerusalem, that the city has fallen, and the temple is destroyed. Ezekiel's grim warnings have become a reality. But remember, the end of chapter 11, that's not the end of the story. And so in the next video, we'll explore Ezekiel's profound vision of hope. But for now, that's the first half of the book of Ezekiel.
I'm a teacher just like you. I teach 6th grade science, and if you're anything like me, you've wasted your playtime trying to find a video for one of your lessons for your students. I would always go to YouTube and type in science videos for kids, math videos for kids, and I would spend hours and hours.
So yeah, so the next video will be here. It will do chapter 2, 34 to 48, which is the latter half, and we're going to get to the order parts now today, okay?
Book of the prophet Ezekiel. In the first video, we were introduced to Ezekiel the priest, and he's sitting among the exiles in Babylon. And he's confronted by the awesome glory of God's temple presence, but it's appearing to him in Babylon. And then Ezekiel discovers why. It's because of Israel's idolatry and injustice that has compelled God to abandon his own temple. And while there is still hope for the future, the book went on to develop Ezekiel's message of divine judgment, first for Israel and then for the nations around Israel. And then a key moment happened in chapter 33. Ezekiel receives a report that the Babylonian siege of Jerusalem is over because the city has fallen. The temple is destroyed. Ezekiel's grim words of warning came true. The exile was the most horrendous catastrophe that ever happened to Israel, and it raised the big questions of whether God was done with Israel for good. But remember, at the end of chapter 11, God promised that there was still a future beyond exile for Israel. And so the rest of the book is designed to explore Ezekiel's vision of hope, first for Israel, then for the nations, and then for all of creation. The hope for Israel begins with God promising to raise up a new David, a future messianic king, who's going to be the kind of leader that Israel needed but never got. And this new Israel, who's going to come under the messianic king's rule, is going to be a transformed people. God's going to deal with the heart of their problem of rebellion by giving them new hearts. It's just like Moses promised at the end of the book of Deuteronomy. God says he's going to remove their hard hearts and send his spirit into his people to give them new, soft hearts that can love and obey their God. And this idea gets developed in the next strange vision. Ezekiel sees a huge valley filled up with dry human bones and skeletons, and God tells him that it's an image, a metaphor for Israel's spiritual state. So their rebellion against God, it resulted in exile and the literal death of many people, but it was also a metaphorical death of their covenant relationship. And God tells Ezekiel that his spirit is coming to bring his people back to life. And so this wind comes and it causes all of the bones to stand up and it fills them with breath and life. And then skin grows over the bones. And then all of a sudden Ezekiel sees all of these new humans standing in front of him. Now this vision, it's recalling the story about the creation of humans in Genesis chapter 2, where God made humans out of dirt and divine breath. And so Israel and all humanity have rebelled, resulting in death. And so the only hope is that God would perform a new act of creation and remake humans in such a way that they can truly live in a relationship of love with God and with each other. And so after God is going to deal with the evil that's in the hearts of his own people, some questions still remain unresolved. Like, what about the evil that's still rampant out there among the nations? And what about the future of God's dwelling place in the temple? And this is what the final two sections of the book are about. So first come chapters 38 and 39, and they promise God's final defeat of evil among the nations, which gets personified by a ruler who's named Gog from the land of Magog. Now, this name is derived from a genealogy of ancient kingdoms and lands from Genesis chapter 10, and it referred to powerful nations from the distant. And so Ezekiel picks up this ancient biblical name as an image of any and all violent kingdoms. And so we find that Gog gets allied with 7 nations that come from all 4 directions of the compass. Is clearly an image that represents all of the nations. And this also helps us understand why Ezekiel describes Gog with images that he used earlier in the book to describe the king of Tyre and the king of Egypt, Pharaoh. For Ezekiel, Gog is an amalgam of all of the worst, most violent people in the Bible. Gog is the archetype of human rebellion against God. The basic story in these chapters is that Gog resists God's plan to restore his people. And so just like Pharaoh in the Exodus story, Gog comes to destroy the people. But God unleashes his justice on Gog, and it's in a flurry of scenes that don't actually make very good literal sense if you read them in sequence. Because first, Gog and his armies are consumed by an earthquake, but then they're consumed by fire 2 different times. And then after that, God comes and strikes Gog and his army down in the fields where they lay unburied for months. It's clear that these scenes are full of symbol and imagery. Ezekiel has pulled out his entire poetic tool set here to describe how God is determined to finally defeat human evil that has ruined his world. And it's so that he can pave the way for a new creation. And so once evil is finally dealt with among the nations, the last section of the book describes how God's presence is going to one day return to his people and his temple to bring cosmic restoration. So Ezekiel first gets this long, elaborate vision of a new temple and a new city. He's given this heavenly tour guide who shows him around the new temple complex, and it's much larger and more majestic than even Solomon's temple. There's a new altar, new priests, a whole new system of worship. And then after this elaborate tour, God's glorious throne chariot that he saw back in his first vision comes back, and it enters the new temple. Now, the meaning of these temple visions has been the source of debate for a long, long time. So some Christian Jewish readers believe that this vision will be fulfilled literally one day, and that these chapters offer the actual blueprints of the new temple that will be built when the Messiah returns and brings God's kingdom. But many other Jewish and Christian readers think that this vision, like all of Ezekiel's other visions, is full of symbols, and they depict the reality of God's presence returning to his people in the Messianic kingdom, but not necessarily in the form of an actual building. Whichever view you take, it's important that Ezekiel never calls the city Jerusalem, and chapters 47 and 48 show why. Ezekiel sees this tiny stream pouring out of the temple threshold and steps, and then it quickly becomes this raging river, and then it flows out of the temple and the city into the desert, into one of the most desolate places on planet Earth, the Dead Sea Valley. And then that river, it leaves behind it a trail of trees and life, and then the Dead Sea gets transformed into a living sea that's teeming with plants and animals. All of this imagery comes from the Garden of Eden in Genesis chapters 1 and 2. And we see just how cosmic Ezekiel's vision really is. God's plan has always been to restore all humanity and all creation back to his life-giving presence. And so the book ends with the name of this garden city. The Lord is there. And so Ezekiel's visions come to a close, full of hope for a new future. New humans living in a new world that's animated by God's life-giving spirit. It's a world permeated with God's love and justice. And that's what the book of Ezekiel is all about.
All right. So you can see me right, Anthony? You can see the screen, right? Correct?
Yeah, I can see it. It all looks good. The
Okay.
videos came through clear.
Cool, awesome. So yeah, the three sessions we're gonna go over today are Judgment on the Nations, which is chapter 25 to 32, and then Hope for Israel, which is 34, 37, and then Hope for the Nations, which is 38, 39, and then deals with God. In both, in a lot of these prophecies in chapter 25 to 32, you see Egypt and Tyre, especially when we get to the description of Tyre, it gives descriptions of Satan. And the reason why I bring that up is because even though the king of Tyre was not Satan himself, it describes the demonic power behind him that led him astray, which is Satan himself. That's why he was anointed to be a cherubim. You know, King of Tyre was never anointed to be a king, cherubim. But I definitely want to read this, and I do think we can do 15 chapters, or at least most of it. On here, I'll try to get to 25, 32 next hour, and then at 34 to 39, I think we can probably do that on here. But we're gonna read chapter 25 here. I'm gonna ask Anthony if he can read it, just so it can go here better for me.
All right. Are you in
Yeah.
You gotta switch to NIV.
NIV?
Yeah.
Oh, which one's this one?
BSB? I've never even heard of that.
Oh, this is NIV. Okay.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, cool. Very good. All right. All right, chapter 25. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, set your face against the Ammonites and prophesy against them. Say to them, hear the word of the sovereign Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. Because you say, aha, over my sanctuary when I was desecrated, and over the land of Israel when it was laid waste, and over the people of Judah when they went into exile. Therefore, I am going to give you to the people of the east as a possession. They will set up their camps and pitch their tents among you, and they will eat your fruit and drink your milk. I will turn Rabbah into a pasture for camels, and Ammon into a resting place for sheep. Then you will know that I am the Lord. For this is what the sovereign Lord says: because you have clapped your hands and stamped your feet, rejoicing that all malice of your heart against the land of Israel. Therefore, I will stretch out my hand against you and give you as a plunder to the nations. I will wipe you out from among the nations and exterminate you from the countries. I will destroy you, and you will know that I am the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. Because Moab and Seir said, look, Judah has become like all the other nations. Therefore, I will expose the flank of Moab, beginning at its frontier towns, Beth Jeshimosh, Baalmeon, and Kirithaim, the glory of that land. I will give it to Moab. I will give Moab along with the Ammonites to the people of the east as a possession, so that the Moabites and the Ammonites will not be remembered among the nations, and I will inflict punishment on Moab. Then they will know that I am the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. Because Edom took revenge on Judah and became very guilty by doing so, therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says: I will stretch out my hand against Edom and kill both man and beast. I will lay it waste, and from Teman to Dedan they will fall by the sword. I will take vengeance on Edom by the hand of my people Israel, and they will deal with Edom in accordance with my anger and my wrath. They will know my vengeance, declares the sovereign Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. because the Philistines acted in vengeance and took revenge with malice in their hearts, and with ancient hostility sought to destroy Judah. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says: I am about to stretch out my hand against the Philistines, and I will wipe out the Kerethites and destroy those remaining along the coast. I will carry out a great vengeance on them and punish them in my wrath. Then they will know that I am the Lord when I take vengeance on them.
Awesome. Thank you, brother.
Amen.
There you go. So I'm going to read the commentary here. So Ezekiel already pronounced judgment on Ammon chapter 21. Now Ammon was singled out to be the headless of the nation that will feel the sting of divine judgment. Ammon and Israel have been in conflict since the time of Jephthah during the period of the judges. You see this Judges 10:6, 10 to 11 here. Saul fought with the Ammonites to rescue Jez Gideon, and David conquered Ammon. Sometime after the death of Solomon, the Ammonites regained their independence and renewed their hostilities with Judah. During the Jezreel's reign, the Ammonites joined the Moabites and Edomites in an unsuccessful attack on Judah. Ammon tried to expand her territory at Israel's expense. She even sided initially with Nebuchadnezzar in an attempt to gain additional territory after Jeroboam's revolt. In 593 BC, Ammon joined a secret meeting of older potential conspirators to consider rebelling against Babylon. Jeremiah 20. Uh, 27 1-7. That plan did not materialize, but in 588 she did unite with Judah and Tyre against Babylon. So the two ancient enemies, Judah and Ammon, were joined against a common foe. But Nebuchadnezzar decided to attack Judah instead of Ammon. Ammon was relieved that she'd been spared. Instead of coming to Judah's aid, she rejoiced over Judah's misfortune, hoping to profit territorially from Judah's destruction. Against this background, Ezekiel gives this prophecy. Twice he repeats this: because therefore you will know, formula to show the destruction of Ammon. Ammon rejoiced over the destruction of the temple, mocking, saying, the destination and exile the people of Judah. The Ammonites gloated over Judah's misfortune. God's judgment would fit Ammon's sin. They would rejoice over Judah's downfall, so they will fall. God would send them to the people of the east. Nomadic desert tribes let men as a possession. These non-men will overturn the Ammonites, turning Rahab, Ammon's capital city, into a pasture for camels, and Ammon into a resting place for sheep. Because Ammon's malice against Israel, Ammon will be plundered by older nations and destroyed. So, judgment on Moab, the hostility between Moab and Israel began when Balaam, the king of Moab, tried to oppose Israel, as Moses led them to Palestine in the book of Numbers. During that time of Judges, Israel was oppressed by Eon, the king of Moab. Relationships with the countries improved slightly after that. Some Israelites went to Moab during a famine. Through this contact, Ruth the Moabites entered Israel's history and the royal line of David. The relationship with Moab and Israel again deteriorated during Saul's reign. David conquered Moab and made it a vassal of Israel. It remained under Israel's control through Solomon's reign. Moab rebelled against Israel after Israel and Judah split during Jezebel's reign, 2 Kings chapter 3. Moth united with Ammon, Edom in an ill attempt to defeat Judah, also during Jezreel's reign, 2 Corinthians 21:3. But later Moab supported Israel, Babylon, and attacked Judah after Jeroboam's revolt, possibly hoping to gain additional territory. Moab then ordered nations consider revolting from Babylon, but no evidence indicates that she never ever did. Chapter 25, 8:11, Moab's sin, Ezekiel said, was her contempt for God's people. Moab and Sarah said, "Look, the house of Judah has become like all the other nations." Seir was the name of the mountain range south of the Dead Sea that encompassed the country of Edom. That became synonymous with the land of Edom. Edom was included here with Moab. Thought of her own judgment will come next, because she was guilty of the same sin of envy and contentment. In their scorn, Moab and Edom were denying God's promises to Israel. By minimizing Judah's position of centrality among the nations, they were profaning the name of God who had promised Judah that position. Because Moab treated Judah with contentment, God would remove Moab's glory by exposing its northern flank to attack. He would destroy 3 towns, Bethesda, Bel-Menem, and Kir Atendem. I don't know how to pronounce it. So, but in addition to losing her defenses, Moab would also lose her freedom. God said he would give Moab to the people of the east, the same fate as the northern desert tribesmen who will overturn Ammon will also return Moab. Like Ammon and Moab, Edom was in a long series of conflict with Israel. The strife actually began when Edom refused to let Israel cross her territory during the time of wilderness wanderings. Saul fought the Edomites, and David finally captured Edom and made it a vassal state to Israel. Solomon further exploited Edom, established Edom in Edom's at Israel's seaport. But Edom opposed Solomon during the last part of his reign. The nation continued as a vassal state after Israel and Judah split, and it was controlled by a governor. From Judah until after the time of Jezreel, in the days of Jeroboam, 845, Edom successfully rebelled against Judah and regained freedom. Therefore, Judah and Edom struggled to see who will control the vital caravan and shipping routes in the southern end of the Transjordan Highway. Both Annas and Uzziah regained territory that had been lost to Edom, but Edom counterattacked during Manasseh's reign and inflicted major loss on Judah. Edom became vassal of Babylon. After Nebuchadnezzar's stunning defeat of Egypt, and then Edom joined over conspirators and planning to revolt against Babylon, but did not carry out the plan. When Judah revolted in 588, Edom sided with Babylon and aided Babylon in her assault on Judah. Babylon, if her foe was destroyed, can she have power? Here, then it was judgment on Phthio. The Philistines here, she acted in violence and vengeance. Higher, So, the Philistines were disposing on here, and then you see judgment on Tyre here. And that's where we're gonna focus next, right here, judgment on Tyre. And Tyre here. And I'm gonna read chapter 26, and then I'm gonna have kind of here. So 26, 28 is gonna deal with the king of Tyre, but the 11th month of the 12th year, on the first day of the month, the word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, because of Tyre has said of Jerusalem, the gates nations broken, doors have swung open to me. Now she lies in ruins. I will prosper. Therefore, this is what the Lord says. I'm against you, Tyre. I'll bring many nations against you. Like the seas casting out its waves, they will destroy the walls of Tyre and put down her towers. I will scrape away her rubble and make her bare rock. Out in the sea she will become a place to spread fish nets. For I have spoken, declares Sovereign Lord. She will become plumber for the nations. Her settlement on the mainlands will be raged by the sword, and they will know that I am the Lord. For this is what the Sovereign Lord says. From the north I'm going to bring against Tyre Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, king of kings, with horses, chariots, war horsemen, and a great army. He will ravage your settlements on the mainland with the sword. He will set up sieges works against you, build a ramp up to your walls, and raise his shields against you. He will direct the blows of his raging ramps against your walls, and demolish your towers with his weapons. His horses will be so many that they will cover you with dust. Your walls will tremble at the noise of the war horses, wagons, chariots when he enter your gates, as a man enter a city whose walls have been broken through. The hoofs of his horses will trample all your streets, and you will kill your people with the sword. Your strong pillars will fall to the ground, and they will plunder your wealth and your loot. Honor your loot. Honor your loot. Your wealth loot merchants, they will break your walls, demolish your fine horses, and I will put no end to your noisy sounds. The music of your hearts will be heard no more. I'll make you a bare rock, that you will become a place to spread fish nets. You never will be rebuilt, for I, the Lord, have spoken, declares Sovereign Lord. This is what the Sovereign Lord says. Would not the coastlands tremble at the sound of your fall? Do the princes of coast will bow down, clothed with terror, they will sat down. Are you destroyed city over you, people of man and sea? You are power on the sea, your terror all live. Now the coastlands tremble, the islands in the sea. This was the Sovereign Lord. I'll make you a desolate city, like a city no longer inhabited. When I bring ocean depths over you, it will vast waters will cover you. Then I will bring down with those who go down to the pit. To the people of long ago, I will make you dwell in the earth below. As ancient ruins, those who go down to the pit, you will not return to your place in the land of the living. I'll bring you horrible end. You'll be no more. You'll be sought, you'll never be found, declares Sovereign Lord. As there are four short prophecies against nations east and west of Israel, Ezekiel delivers a long prophecy, right? To the nation / city, the Tyre to the north of Israel. This session is four separate oracles. The first oracle was a direct prophecy of Tyre's destruction. The second was a lament are a funeral dirge for the fallen city. The third and fourth were directed against ruler and king Tyre. So destruction of the city. All but 4 divisions in this chapter includes this is what the sovereign from sovereign Lord says. This prophecy was given in 11th year. But Ezekiel did not say which month, since Jerusalem fell to Babylon. And possibly Ezekiel's prophecy against Tyre was promoted by Jerusalem's immense cause. The verses 1 to 6, Ezekiel followed because therefore then you know they used Tyresen was her greedy rejoicing over Jerusalem's fall, saying, aha, now that Jerusalem was destroyed, her doors will be swung open to Tyre. Tyre will prosper, both Tyre and Jerusalem, and die for the trade routes between Egypt and the rest of the Middle East. Tyre dominate the sea route, Jerusalem control the caravan routes. Tyre responds to Jerusalem's fall like a greedy merchant glowing over a rival's catastrophe. Without Jerusalem being able to secure the overland caravan routes, more products would be shipped by the sea. So Tyre saw Jerusalem's fall as an opportunity to cover the marketplace for trade. God's judgment against Tyre would fit her crime. Will bring many nations against you. Like the sea casting out its waves, Tyre's pride was the sea-going brows. She knew the Mediterranean Sea better than most nations. So Ezekiel, the image of a violent ocean storm. To picture God's punishment, like ocean waves invading country on there. So Tyre means rock, bevel, and no longer being central to the commercial. She would become a place to spread fish nets. Fishermen generally spread there. So God also say will bring the north Nebuchadnezzar, right? The king would destroy Jerusalem, also attack Terror after defeating Nebuchadnezzar upon whose army north. All settlements of the mainland were destroyed. They destroyed the mainland, but not the island stronghold. However, evidence suggests the island surrender to Nebuchadnezzar. That year, Baal II succeeded into the throne of Tyre. Most likely, this was a political move by Nebuchadnezzar to remove a rebellious king and install a loyal vassal king. Some people think an Atul was deported to Babylon, but 2018 said that Nebuchadnezzar assassinated him. Ezekiel switched from the singular he to the plural they, probably the ship to the nations that followed Nebuchadnezzar attacking, completing the destruction. Alexander the Great devastated the city in 332. When it refused to submit to his advancing forces, Alexander destroyed the mainland city and cast away to the island fortress, which he destroyed. In doing so, he stumbled, trembled, rubble to the sea. Though Tyre recovered Nebuchadnezzar's and Alexander's onslaught, she never regained power. She held the power she held before the attacks. The final destruction and terror will be complete. God predicted the city will never be rebuilt. Today, this one great commercialized in ruins. Though the surrounding areas have been rebuilt, the original site is a mute testimony to God's awesome judgment. The third session of this prophecy discusses the response of Tyre's neighbors to the fall. Talks about the shock waves, and then right here it says she will destinate to the ground, ocean dust will sweep over, be caught lost in sea, right? And then it says Tyre will go down to the pit. The pit is symbolic to Sheol or grave. In the Old Testament times, death was a fearful event. The saints had some idea of resurrection. Most view the grave as a place of no return. Ezekiel expresses in Tyre she will enter the place of the departed death and never been able to return to the land of the living. People will long for her, but she will never again be found. So I'm gonna ask, I'm gonna go here. I'm gonna ask Anthony to read the next two chapters, 27, 28.
Chapter 27. And the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, take up a lament concerning Tyre. Say to Tyre, situated at the gateway of the sea, merchant of the peoples on many coasts, this is what the sovereign Lord says. You say, Tyre, I am perfect in beauty. Your domain was the high seas. Your builder brought your beauty to perfection. They made all your timbers of juniper from Sinir. They took a cedar from Lebanon to make a mast for you. Of oaks from Bashan, they made you oars. Of cypress wood from the coast of Cyprus, they made your deck adorned with ivory. Fine embroidered linen from Egypt was your sail, and served as your banner. Your awnings were of blue and purple from the coast of Elisha. For men of Sidon and Arvad were your oarsmen, your skilled men. Tyre were abroad as your sailors. Veteran craftsmen of Byblos were on board, as shipwrights to caulk your seams. All the ships of the sea and their sailors came alongside to trade for your wares. Men of Persia, Lydia, and Put served as soldiers in your army. They hung their shields and helmets on your walls, bringing you splendor. Men of Arvad and Halek guarded your walls on every side. Men of Gamad were in your towers. They hung their shields around your walls. They brought your beauty to perfection. Tarshish did business with you because of your great wealth of goods. They exchanged silver, iron, tin, and lead for your merchandise. Greece, Tubal, and Meshech did business with you. They traded human beings and articles of bronze for your wares. Men of Beth Togarmah exchanged chariot horses, cavalry horses, and mules for your merchandise. The men of Rhodes traded with you, and many coastlands were your customers. They paid you with ivory tusks and ebony. Aram did business with you because of your many products. They exchanged turquoise, purple fabric, embroidered work, fine linen, coral, and rubies for your merchandise. Judah and Israel traded with you. They exchanged wheat from Minnith and confections, honey, olive oil, and balm for your wares. Damascus did business with you because of your many products and great wealth of goods. They offered wine from Helbon, wool from Zahar, and casks of wine from Izai in exchange for your wares. Raw iron, cassia, and calamus. Dedan traded in saddle blankets with you. Arabia and all the princes of Kedar were your customers. They did business with you in lambs, rams, and goats. The merchandise of Sheba and Rama traded with you. For your merchandise they exchanged the finest of all kinds of spices and precious stones and gold. Haran and Cana and Eden and merchants of Sheba, Asher, and Kilmad traded with you. In your marketplace, they traded with you beautiful garments, blue fabric, embroidered work, and multicolored rugs with cords twisted and tightly knotted. The ships of Tarshish serve as carriers for your wares. You are filled with heavy cargo as you sail to the sea. Your oarsmen take you out to high sea, but the east wind will break you to pieces far out at sea. Your wealth and merchandise and wares, your mariners and sailors and shipwrights, your merchants and all your soldiers and everyone else on board will sink into the heart of the sea on the day of your shipwreck. The shorelands will quake when your sailors cry out. All who handle the oars will abandon their ships. The mariners and all the sailors will stand on the shore. They will raise their voice and cry bitterly over you. They will sprinkle dust on their heads and roll in ashes. They will shave their heads because of you and will put on sackcloth. They will weep over you with anguish of soul, with bitter mourning, as they wail and mourn over you. They will take up a lament concerning you. Who was ever silenced like Tyre, surrounded by the sea? When your merchandise went out on the seas, you satisfied many nations with your great wealth and your wares. You enriched the kings of the earth. Now you are shattered by the sea in the depths of the waters. Your wares and all your company have gone down with you. All who live in the coastlands are appalled at you. Their kings shudder with horror. Their faces are distorted with fear. The merchants among the nations scoff at you. You have come to a horrible end and will be no more. And then chapter 28.
Yeah.
The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, say to the ruler of Tyre, this is what the sovereign Lord says. In the pride of your heart, you say, I am a god. I sit on the throne of a god in the heart of the seas. But you are a mere mortal and not a god, though you think that you are as wise as a god. Are you wiser than Daniel, in no secret hidden from you? By your wisdom and understanding, you have gained wealth for yourself and amassed gold and silver in your treasuries. By your great skill in trading, you have increased your wealth, and because of your wealth, your heart has grown proud. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Because you think you are wise as a god, I am going to bring foreigners against you, the most ruthless of nations. They will draw their swords against your beauty and wisdom and pierce your shining splendor. They will bring you down to the pit, and you will die a violent death in the heart of the sea. Will you then say, I am a god, in the presence of those who kill you? You will be but a mortal, not a god, in the hands of those who slay you. You will die the death of the uncircumcised at the hands of the foreigners. I have spoken, declares the sovereign Lord. The word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, take up a lament concerning the king of Tyre and say to him, this is what the sovereign Lord says. You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone adorned you. Carnelian, chrysolite, and emerald, topaz and onyx and jasper, lapis lazuli, turquoise and beryl. Your settings and mountings were made of gold. On the day you were created, they were prepared. You were anointed as a guardian cherub, for so I ordained you. You were on the holy mount of God. You walked among the fiery stones. You were blameless in your ways, from the day you were created till wickedness was found in you. Through your widespread trade, you were filled with violence, and you sinned. So I drove you in disgrace from the mount of God, and I expelled you, guardian cherub, from among the fiery stones. Your heart became proud on account of your beauty, and you corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor. So I threw you to the earth. I made a spectacle of you before kings. By your many sins and dishonest trade, you have desecrated your sanctuaries. So I have made a fire come out from you, and it consumed you, and I reduced you to ashes on the ground in the sight of all who are watching. All the nations who knew you are appalled at you. You have come to a horrible end and will be no more. The word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, set your face against Sidon. Prophesy against her and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against you, Sidon, and among you I will display my glory. You will know that I am the Lord when I inflict punishment on you, and within you am proved to be holy. I will send a plague upon you and make blood flow in your streets. The slain will fall within you, with the sword against you on every side. Then you will know that I am the Lord. No longer will the people of Israel have malicious neighbors who are painful briars and sharp thorns. They will know that I am the sovereign Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. When I gather the people of Israel from the nations where they have been scattered, I will be proved holy through them in sight of the nations. Then they will live in their own land, which I gave to my servant Jacob. They will live there in safety and will build houses and plant vineyards. They will live in safety when I inflict punishment on all their neighbors who malign them. They will know that I am the Lord their God.
Thank you, brother.
Amen.
So here, Ezekiel, I'm gonna go Ezekiel 28. Because I wanna, for the sake of time, I'm gonna skip over 27 and really deal with the restoration of Israel. Ezekiel's third message against Tyre is related specifically to the ruler of Tyre. So you see here, these two prophecies deal with the man and the king, which refers to Satan, the person having the influence directly or indirectly. The scriptures doesn't really say, but their ruler means the man at the top. Ezekiel had prophesied against the whole city. He was now singling out the city's ruler for a special word from God. This ruler then was Antioch III, and the underlying sin of Cyrus king was his pride, which proclaimed him to view himself as a god. His claim to deity is referred to again in Ezekiel. Heavily in Ezekiel's day, the king's attire believed they were divine. The king's claim to deity was false. God said, "You are a man, not a god." Anton III was only immortal. And evidently, he felt that he had wisdom that only God possessed. In a statement dripping with irony, Ezekiel asked the king, "Are you wiser than Daniel? There's no secret hidden from you." The Daniel in view was probably the prophet Daniel. He had already achieved a reputation for his wisdom in the court of Nebuchadnezzar. The irony was that Antonin III felt his wisdom exceeded that of even Daniel, who served the country, who ultimately defeated Tyre. Daniel, who attributed all his wisdom to God, was much wiser than Antonin III, who claimed to be a god. Third, who had been able to use his wisdom and skill to acquire material possession. Lucrative trade had produced great wealth, including gold and silver. It also increased his pride. His heart had grown proud. God would not let the pride of Tyrus' rule go unchallenged. The foreigners of whom God will bring against Tyre had already been identified as the Babylonians. The Babylonians was ruthless. Her treatment of others, unimpressed with Anton's beauty and wisdom, Babylon would destroy him in a violent way in the hearts of the city. With the slaying of his enemies, it would be evident that he was a god. Antonin III was removed from his throne, but Nebuchadnezzar bound to put in his place Antonin III and paid a high price for rebelling against Nebuchadnezzar. In fact, Antonin died the death of the uncircumcised at the hands of foreigners. While the Ephesian practiced circumcision, Ezekiel's word conveyed a meaning that went beyond this cultural practice. To die the death of the uncircumcised meant to die in shame. The king who claimed to be a god will suffer an honorable death as a man. Ezekiel's final prophecy against Tyre was a lament concerning the king of Tyre. The use of king, Melikin, said ruler was specific. Ezekiel used the word king sparingly. Apart from King Joachim, he did not use the title king of any of Israel's monarchies. The change from ruler to king was specific in light of king was in light in the context of Jesu prophecy. The king instead of ruler Ezekiel rebuked the ruler claiming to be a god, that he was just a man. But verses describe the king that could not apply to a mere man. And what he means by this, the author here, is saying that the king refers to Satan, the power behind the ruler. The king had appeared in Garden of Eden, had been a guardian cherubim, had possessed free access to God's holy mountain, and had been sinless from the time he was created. Something that Ezekiel was describing in the third and highly poetic language, comparing with Adam. But some of the language does not apply to Adam. For example, Adam was not a guardian cherubim and did not have free access to the mountain of God. Also, the description of verses 13 to 16 do not fit the first man in the Garden of Eden. When Adam sinned, he was not casted from the mountain of God to the earth, and no nation existed to be applauded at his fall. Older scholars have held that Ezekiel was describing the God behind the king of Tyre, perhaps Babel, and God judged the ruler of Tyre and the God of the city who empowered the ruler. Receiving concurrence to Ezekiel would give credence to the methodological table of God supporting the ruler of Tyre, when much in his book showed that the falsehood of pagan beliefs. Also, Ezekiel's imagery was drawn from the biblical account of creation, not pagan methodologies. Ezekiel was not describing an ideal man or false god in verses 11-26, but his switch from ruler to king and his allusions to the Garden of Eden do imply that the individual being described was more than a human. The best explanation of Ezekiel is describing Satan, who was the true king of Tyre, the one motivating the human ruler of Tyre. So Satan essentially possessing or influencing the ruler of Tyre. Satan was in the Garden of Eden in Genesis 3, and his chief sin was pride. First Timothy 3:6 talks about that. He also had access to God's presence. You see that in Job 1. Speaking of God's judgment, the human ruler of Tyre for his pride. The prophet landed the synodic king who also judged for his pride. Tyre was motivated by the same sin of Satan, who will suffer the same fate. Ezekiel described the beauty and the perfection of Satan as originally created. He was morally perfection, full of wisdom, perfect in beauty. God did not create Satan as a prime minister of evil. As with all God's creation, Satan was perfectly created, being one of the crown achievements in the God's angelic realm. Satan was exalted, given an exalted place. He was in Eden, the garden of God. Eden was an antipode of God's beautiful creation. Satan's beauty matched that of Eden. Every precious stone adored him. Ezekiel listed 9 gems in describing Satan's beauty. There were 9 of the 12 kinds of stones worn in the breastplate of Israel's high priest. These precious stones probably symbolized Satan's beauty and high position. God had appointed Satan as a cherubim, guardian cherubim. The cherubim were the inner circle of angels who had the closest access to God and guarded his holiness. Satan also had free access to God's holy mountain, heaven, and he walked along the fiery stones. Some associates the fiery stones with the precious gems. But the stones were part of Satan's trier, where the stones of verses 14-16 were part of the Alamine where Satan dwelt. Others identified the fiery stones with God's fiery wall of protection. They see Satan's dwelling inside and behind God's outer defenses in the inner courts of heaven itself. This view is impossible, but the word translated along can have an idea between or inside. However, exactification was stating that Ezekiel had access to God's presence. As originally created by God, Satan was blameless until wickedness was found in him, and he sinned. The sin had corrupted Satan, was self-generated, created blameless. His sin was pride because of his beauty. Satan spoiled his wisdom, and because of his splendor, Satan led to his fall and judgment. That of Ezekiel presented the fall as single act, it actually occurred in stages. Satan's initial judgment was exposed from the position of God before his throne. God expelled him from the mountain of God. Satan was cast from God's government in heaven, but still allowed access to God. But in the tribulation, Satan will be cast from heaven and restricted to the earth. In the millennium, he will be cast in the bottomless pit, and after his brief release, he will be cast into the lake of fire forever. One of the elements of Satan's sin was his widespread dishonest trade. The word for trade comes from the verb rakah, to go from one to another. Ezekiel had used the noun in seeking Tyre's commercial activities. Does this mean Satan was operating a business? Obviously not. Instead, Ezekiel was comparing human prince of Tyre and the satanic king. So Ezekiel used a word that conveyed a broad meaning. Satan's position in heaven involved a broad contact with many elements of God's creation, much as the prince Tyrus enabled him to contact many nations. That of Ezekiel was describing the ultimate ruler of Tyre. Satan, the purpose of lament was to speak of the city's destruction, to begin to blend characteristics of the satanic king with the human ruler. Satan will be cast to earth, and the king of Tyre will also be cast down before their kings, his enemies. Satan's ultimate destiny will be the lake of fire. The defeat and the death of human ruler Tyre was pictured as being consumed by fire. Both Satan's and Tyre's defeat will shock those nations. And all who have followed, they be upheld because of Satan's Tyre's ending. So, right there. Yeah, so I think we'll read, Anthony, you want to read 29 to 32 briefly, and then I will read 33, and then I will start going into 33 commentary. Okay.
Sure.
Cool.
All right. So chapter 29.
Yeah. Let me turn off my video.
Sure.
There you go. 29.
In the 10th year, in the 10th month, on the 12th day, the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, set your face against Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and prophesy against him and against all Egypt. Speak to him and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against you, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, your great monster lying among your streams. You say, the Nile belongs to me. I made it for myself, but I will put hooks in your jaws and make the fish of your streams stick to your scales. I will pull you out from among your streams with all the fish sticking to your scales. I will leave you in the desert, and you and all the fish of your streams. You will fall on the open field and not be gathered or picked up. I will give you as food to the beasts of the earth and to the birds of the sky. Then all who live in Egypt will know that I am the Lord. You have been a staff of reed for the people of Israel. When they grasped you with their hands, you splintered and you tore open their shoulders. When they leaned on you, you broke their backs and were wrenched. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I will bring a sword against you and kill both man and beast. Egypt will become a desolate wasteland. Then they will know that I am the Lord. Because you said, the Nile is mine, I made it. Therefore, I am against you and against your streams, and will make the land of Egypt a ruin and desolate waste from Migdol to Aswan, as far as the border of Cush. The foot of neither man nor beast will pass through it. No one will live there for 40 years. I will make the land of Egypt desolate among devastated lands, and her cities will also lie desolate 40 years among ruined cities. And I will disperse the Egyptians among the nations and scatter them through the countries. Yet this is what the sovereign Lord says. At the end of 40 years, I will gather the Egyptians from the nations where they were scattered. I will bring them back from captivity and return them to Upper Egypt, the land of their ancestry. There they will be a lowly kingdom. It will be the lowliest of kingdoms and will never again exalt itself above the other nations. I will make it so weak that it will never again rule over the nations. Egypt will no longer be a source of confidence for the people of Israel, but will be a reminder of their sin in turning to her for help. Then they will know that I am the sovereign Lord. In the 27th year, in the first month of the first day, the word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, drove his army in a hard campaign against Tyre. Every head was rubbed bare, and every shoulder made raw. Yet he and his army got no reward from the campaign he led against Tyre. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says: I am going to give Egypt to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and he will carry off its wealth. He will loot and plunder the land as pay for his army. I have given him Egypt as a reward for his efforts because he and his armies did it for me, declares the sovereign Lord. On that day I will make a horn grow from the Israelites, and I will open up your mouth among them, and they will know that I am the Lord.
Yeah. Just to share, that horn refers to Israel's strength. In the book, it talks about them being strength as a nation. So even here, you see right here in the notes here symbolizes strength. Because
Amen.
as a nation, they were destroyed. Their strength was destroyed when Nebuchadnezzar destroyed their cities. Egypt was supposed to be, they were hoping Egypt to protect them. And what happened, we see this in what happened in Jeremiah. You know, Jeremiah was taken to Egypt. But you see here, Nebuchadnezzar goes to Egypt. We never find out what happens to Jeremiah at the end. So just want to share that. But yeah, keep reading, brother. You're good to go. Okay.
Amen. All right. Ezekiel 30. The word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, prophesy and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Wail and say, alas for that day, for the day is near. The day of the Lord is near, a day of clouds, a time of doom for the nations. A sword will come against Egypt, and anguish will come against Cush. When the slain fall in Egypt, her wealth will be carried away, and her foundations torn down. Cush and Lydia and all Arabia, Kub and the people of the covenant land will fall by the sword along with Egypt. This is what the Lord says: the allies of Egypt will fall, and her proud strength will fail. From Migdol to Aswan, they will fall by the sword within her, declares the sovereign Lord. They will be desolate among desolate lands, and their cities will lie among ruined cities. Then they will know that I am the Lord when I set fire to Egypt, and all her helpers are crushed. On that day, messengers will go out from me in ships to frighten Cush out of her complacency. Anguish will take hold of them on the day of Egypt's doom, for it is sure to come. This is what the sovereign Lord says: I will put an end to the hordes of Egypt by the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. He and his army, the most ruthless of nations, will be brought in to destroy the land. They will draw their swords against Egypt and fill the land with the slain. I will dry up the waters of the Nile and sell the land to an evil nation by the hand of foreigners. I will lay waste the land and everything in it. I, the Lord, have spoken. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I will destroy the idols and put an end to the images in Memphis. No longer will there be a prince in Egypt, and I will spread fear throughout the land. I will lay waste to Upper Egypt and set fire to Zoan and inflict punishment on Thebes. I will pour out my wrath on Pelusium and the stronghold of Egypt. I will wipe out the hordes of Thebes. I will set fire to Egypt. Pelusium will writhe with agony. Thebes will be taken by storm. Memphis will be in constant distress. The young men of Heliopolis and Bubastis will fall by the sword. The cities themselves will go into captivity. The dark will be the day of Taphanes when I break the yoke of Egypt. There her proud strength will come to an end. She will be covered with the clouds, and her villages will go into captivity. So I will inflict punishment on Egypt, and they will know that I am the Lord. In the 11th year, in the first month, on the 7th day, the word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, I have broken the arm of the Pharaoh king of Egypt. It has not been bound up to be healed or put in a splint so that it may become strong enough to hold a sword. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against Pharaoh, king of Egypt. I will break both his arms, the good arm as well as the broken one, and make the sword fall from his hand. I will disperse the Egyptians among the nations and scatter them through the countries. I will strengthen the arms of the king of Babylon and put my sword in his hand. I will break the arms of Pharaoh, and he will groan before him like a mortally wounded man. I will strengthen the arms of the king of Babylon, but the arms of Pharaoh will fall limp. Then they will know that I am the Lord. When I put my sword into the hand of the king of Babylon, and he brandishes it against Egypt, I will disperse the Egyptians among the nations and scatter them through the countries. Then they will know that I am the Lord.
Awesome. Let's just move to 33 because I know we're running out of time. I want to go to 33 here.
Okay.
Yeah. So here we see right here we see so the message now changes from judgment to renewal, a renewal call to Ezekiel. And the reason why the renewal call happens is because Jerusalem has fallen. All Ezekiel's prophecies have now come true. And now Ezekiel is to warn them for a message of hope. So there's a renewal here. And that renewal here is for them to explain Jerusalem's fall, but also to restore Israel. So Ezekiel 33 to 36 deals with that renewed call and to be able to restore Israel here. Yeah.
All right. Ezekiel 33. The word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, speak to your people and say to them, when I bring the sword against a land, and the people of the land choose one of their men and make him their watchman, and he sees the sword coming against the land and blows the trumpet to warn the people, then if anyone hears the trumpet but does not heed the warning of the sword, and the sword comes and takes their life, their blood will be on their own head. Since they heard the sound of the trumpet but did not heed the warning, their blood will be on their own head. If they had heeded the warning, they would have saved themselves. But if the watchman sees the sword coming and does not blow the trumpet to warn the people, and the sword comes and takes someone's life, that person's life will be taken because of their sin. But I will hold the watchmen accountable for their blood. Son of man, I made you a watchman for the people of Israel. So hear the word I speak and give them warning from me. When I say to the wicked, you wicked person, you will surely die, and you do not speak out to dissuade them of their ways, that wicked person will die for their sin. And I will hold you accountable for their blood. But if you do warn the wicked person to turn from their ways, and they do not do so, they will die in their sin, though you yourself will be saved. Son of man, say to the Israelites, this is what you are saying. Our offenses and our sins weigh us down, and we are wasting away because of them. How then can we live? Say to them, as surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but rather that they turn from their ways and live. Turn from your evil ways. Why will you die, people of Israel? Therefore, Son of man, say to your people, if someone who is righteous disobeys that person's former righteousness, if someone who is righteous disobeys, that person's former righteousness will count for nothing. And if someone who is wicked repents, that person's former wickedness will not bring condemnation. The righteous person who sins will not be allowed to live, even though they were formerly righteous. If I tell a righteous person that they will surely live, but then they trust in their righteousness and do evil, none of the righteous things that person has done will be remembered. They will die for the evil that they have done. And if I say to a wicked person, you will surely die, but they then turn away from their sin and do what is just and right, if they give back what they took in a pledge for a loan, return what they have stolen, follow the decrees that give life, and do no evil, that person will surely live. They will not die. None of the sins that person has committed will be remembered against them. They have done what is just and right. They will surely live.
All right.
Yet your people say,
Yeah, I'm gonna read the thing just because of the sake of time. Obviously,
no problem.
I'm gonna read the sake of time. I'm gonna right here pen myself. I'm just gonna go back by the book and go cover this. So yeah, so 34, chapter 34, 32. I mean 33. I mean. So 33. 33 here. So you see a new life for Israel here. The first step in Israel restoration will be national renewal. So in 33, as the nation died when she went to captivity, her homeland was gone. Her temple destroyed, her king dethroned. Israel's enemies have been trampled. Her false leaders within had led people astray. For her neighbors without have plundered and disunited the land. For Israel to experience God's blessing, she will need to be reborn as a nation. The false leaders will be replaced with true shepherd who will guide the people. So 34 deals with true shepherd will guide the people. The enemies will be judged. And then the people will be restored both to the land and to their God. And their servitude will be guaranteed by God himself. So you see Ezekiel commissioning was first of our judgment on here. So Ezekiel 33, 1-20. You see Ezekiel had been named God's watchman to warn Israel of coming judgment. Ezekiel's first commissioning was to a ministry of judgment, but that ministry was complete. God then appointed Ezekiel for a second time. This message was different. The focus was on individual accountability and responsibility, and the message was trusted by God's restoration of Israel. The opening of Ezekiel's mouth, Ezekiel's prim for his new ministry, inaugurated when the news of Jerusalem's fall reached the captives in Babylon. The fall was delivered by one of Jerusalem's survivors. So he was in exile, and he heard about the Ezekiel, the fall of Jerusalem. Several months and several hundred miles until Ezekiel only did the reality of Ezekiel's writing strike home. Now that Ezekiel was confirmed, there was no need for him to be silent. So his mouth was open the night before the messenger arrived. Ezekiel had remained silent for 7 years, only speaking to alter God's judgment. And the rest of chapter 33 addresses two groups. First, he condemned those Israelites who remained in the land of Israel, expected a soon end to the Babylonian captivity. Then he rebuked those who gathered to hear him in Babylon. The people who remained in Israel after Jerusalem's fall to acknowledge God's judgment compared themselves to Abraham, they claimed to be a remnant, only left by God to possess the land. If the one man had the right to the land, certainly they reasoned the many Israelites had the right to remain there. There was one big difference, though. Abraham dwelt in the land. Abraham was righteous, and they were wicked. They meat with the blood still in it, worship idols, shed blood. The right to possess the land depended on spiritual obedience, not numerical strength. Because of their sins, the people had forfeited their rights to the promised land. Those who felt a smug arrogance in their possession of the land would soon experience the pains of judgment. Those in city ruins will fall by the sword. Those who fell to the countryside will be eaten by wild animals. Those who hid in strongholds and caves would die of plague, striking those who were the same judgment of the people of Jerusalem would experience earlier. Additionally, the land will be desolate. Ezekiel has spoken to exiles in Babylon. He had developed a popular following among the people who recognize him as a prophet. They frequently gathered to hear his message, and the people liked to hear God's word, but neglected to obey it. They did not put the prophet's words into practice. They were paying lip service to God. They still harbored sin in their hearts. With their mouths, they were expressing devotion. Their sins were greedy. Ezekiel's words tantalized these people's ears as much as beautiful songs would do, but his message would never penetrate their hearts. But the day reckoning will come, all those words will come true. They would know that he was prophet. Ezekiel was not referring to the prophecies of Jerusalem fall because he already come true. Some suggest he was referring to the prophecy against the remnant in Judah. It was awful that the message of judgment of the remnant would have been any greater impact than those in captivity in the fall. Therefore, Ezekiel was referring to the fact of the individual responsibility and judgment that God imposes on all people. Each person had to be held accountable for his action in response to God's word. When their day of accountability came, those hearers would be forced to acknowledge the prophetic nature and thus the truth of Ezekiel's message. In chapter 34, we see false shepherds and true shepherds. Israel shepherds had a couple sins here. I'm going to go in there. On here. So chapter 34:1-6, God charged two prophets against the shepherds of Israel. The rulers of Israel were often called shepherds. They were to be strong, caring leaders who guarded the nation like a flock. Ezekiel first explained the sins of the shepherds and the pronounced judgments. So essentially, Israel's leaders did not serve their flock. The first error was to put their interests above those of the people, who to the shepherds of Israel to only take care of themselves. Israel's king had added to their wealth at the expense of the common people. They viewed the flock was a source of wealth to be exploited rather than a trust to be protected. The second error of the leaders was their harsh treatment of the people. A shepherd was to lead his sheep to food, protect them from attack, nurse to health the injured sheep, search for any that stray and got lost. However, Israel's shepherds did not gently nourish the people. They ruled harshly and brutally. The third error of the rulers were their flagrant disregard for people, claiming they'll be scattered while looking for them. 3 times in verses 5 to 6, Ezekiel mentioned that the sheep were scattered. The chief job of a shepherd was to prevent catastrophe. Ezekiel was probably alluding to the Syrian and Babylonian captivities, which had scattered Israel and Judah along the nations. Shepherds have been unable to prevent the very thing they were appointed to guard against. And then verses 7 to 10, the shepherds had neglected their task and the sheep were scattered. It was now time to call Israel shepherds to judgment for their actions. Holding the shepherds accountable for his own flock, God would judge the rulers and remove them from their positions of power. They would no longer have the opportunity to profit at the people's expense. God said, I will rescue my flock from their mouths. It will no longer be for food, but in the sense of the rulers taking advantage of the people. This statement was a bridge to the next session. The false shepherds who brought Israel to ruin. So God himself will intercede and rescue his people. The true shepherd, what the false shepherds failed to accomplish because of their greed, God will bring to pass. He will care for his flock, judge between his sheep, establish a covenant of peace. The flock was scattered because of cruel, indifferent shepherds. If the sheep were to be rescued and restored, the great shepherd needed to rescue them himself. Myself will search for my sheep and look after them. God will personally intervene on Israel's behalf. God's first action will be to restore Israel from the land, from her land from the nations, to pasture her like sheep in a good gazing land. God will do what the false shepherd have failed to do: bring back, strengthen, shepherd with justice. This prophecy was not fulfilled when Israel returned to her land, but it still awaits a future fulfillment. In exercising his justice, God said he will begin by judging the individual sheep. I will judge one sheep and one another between rams and goats. Before the millennium kingdom, God will sort out the righteous and the unrighteous. Only allow the righteous into the millennium. How will God differentiate for one from another? The character of the sheep is seen in their contact. The wicked sheep are those that follow the contact of the shepherds suppressing the weaker sheep. They trample the pasture lands and even muddle the streams, and were left with less than desirable drinking water. These fat sheep were successful in prioritizing the lean sheep. The wicked sheep even butted the weak sheep with horns to drive them away. God would not permit these wicked practices to continue. Instead, he will rescue the oppressed and judge the aggressor. He will judge between one sheep and another. As for judging the individual sheep, God will exercise his leadership by appointing a few shepherds. This shepherd, God stated, will be his servant David. Many see this as an allusion to Christ, good shepherd, who descended from the line of David to be king of Israel. However, nothing in Ezekiel 34:23 demands that Ezekiel was referring to literal King David, who will be resurrected as serve as Israel's righteous prince. David is referred by name elsewhere in the passage. Look to a future restoration of Israel. Also, Ezekiel indicates that David will be a prince of the restored people. This prince will offer himself. Offers an offering for himself during the millennium period. Such would hardly be appropriate for the sinless Son of God, but they will be for David. So it seems this is a literal reference to be a resurrected David. But in place of the false sheep, God will resurrect a true shepherd to attend to his sheep. God's care and protection will result in peace for his people, and I will make a covenant of peace with them. The peace that Israel will always long for will be experienced. The uncertainties associated with desolate places, wild animals, older nations, and the unpredictable weather will be eliminated. The land will enjoy peace, prosperity, and trees will bear fruit, and the ground will yield its crops, and people will be secure in their land, living in safety. God's covenant of peace looks forward to the blessing Israel will experience in millennium. This covenant will establish Israel and her land permanently, and David as their shepherd. Later, Ezekiel stated that the covenant of peace will also involve the rebuilding of God's temple as a visible reminder of his presence. God will restore Israel because of your unique relationship to him. You're my sheep, the sheep of my pastor, my people. I am your God. Enemy Edom destroyed. Why did Ezekiel devote a second prophecy to Edom? Why was it placed in this section on Israel's resurrection? Most likely, Edom was listed here to represent the judgment that God would inflict all nations who oppose Israel. Edom was the prototype of Israel's later foes. The destruction of Edom signaled the beginning of God's judgment on the whole world, based on the nation's treatment of Israel. This prophecy against Edom in three parts, each ending with Ezekiel's common expression. Then they will know that I am the Lord, that I am the sovereign, or I am the Lord. In direct statement of judgment on Edom, God says, I am against you, Mount Seir. Edom geographic name was a mountain range east. It was mountain's homeland when Edom lived. God will make people as desolate as their land. Ezekiel's second section follow because therefore format explain why Edom would be judged. Edom's sin was her enmity against Israel. She had harbored an ancient hospitality and delivered Israelites over to the sword. Edom hoped to profit over Israel's loss, and she invented to Israel's collapse. Because Edom had assisted in Israel's slaughter, God will assist in her slaughter. 4 times in Ezekiel chapter 35:6 refer to bloodshed. This word play on Edom, with red mountains has now red with blood. Since you did not hate bloodshed, bloodshed will pursue you. Edom will suffer the same fate she had tried to inflict. See the comments on them. Many people will be slain, her towns will be desolate, no longer inhabited. Ezekiel again used because therefore formula. Edom also sinned in her desire to possess the land God had promised to Judah and Israel. Edom had said to those two nations who would become her possession. God severely chastised Israel and Judah for their sins. He never abrogated his promises made to Abraham, his descendants. Edom was trying to usurp Israel's title deed to the land, which had been guaranteed by God. God's judgment corresponding to Edom's guilt. I will treat you in accordance with the anger and jealousy you shown in your hatred of them. Edom had there plotted against God's chosen people, so she would now experience consequences in her boast against God. Edom rejoiced when Israel became desolate. Therefore, God would make Edom desolate. Her treatment of Israel determined her own faith. Edom had become an object lesson for all nations. When God restored Israel's portions in the future, he would judge the world's order of nations based on their treatment of Israel. They will be measured by their own actions of Israel. So chapter 36 is said as an antithesis to chapter 35. When God intervenes on Israel's behalf, the mountains of Israel will be judged, but the mountains of Israel will be blessed. Verses 1-7, we see again, Edom is again picture representing all nations who seeks Israel's harm. The first section of the prophecy is because therefore formula to compare judgment on the nations with Israel's restoration. The second section of the prophecy moves from the mountains of Israel to the people of Israel, who will be personally recipients of God's blessing. The fact of Israel's future restoration seems so remote after her fall to Babylon that God would put great emphasis on his personal character rather than external circumstances as a basis for the fulfillment. 10 times the prophet stated, "This is what the sovereign Lord says." Israel mountains to prosper. Ezekiel constructed Israel's personal humiliation before her enemies with great glorification. God's promise to punish Israel's enemies for their sins and howling, slandering, plundering, rejoicing, having malice against Israel. Therefore, God swore with all lifting hand that the nations who have sworn her will also suffer scorn. Surrounding nations seemed to triumph, but their victory was merely temporarily. They will suffer for their sins. In contrast with the judgment about to be inflicted on Israel's enemies, Israel herself could look forward to restoration and blessing. In a reversal of the strategy that God had earlier called again the mountains of Israel, he said the mountains of Israel will produce branches and fruit for his people. They will soon come home. God will restore the land so it can provide the restored remnant. God's blessing will involve numerical growth, for the people will be multiplied. The nation had been demonstrated in the land. Israel's latter state will be far superior to the former. God will restore the people to the land who will prosper the land. He guaranteed the premises of the arrangement. Once Israel is restored to the land, her inheritance will be secure. The land will never again be the rear of Israel for children, rather than be cruel wilderness with drought, famine, death, and it will be a place of blessing. This would take place when Israel possesses her land during the Christ's millennial reign. Besides punishing Israel's enemies, restoring Israel's land, God also removed Israel's reproach. The mockery, humiliation, taunts, scars Israel had been forced to endure will cease. She will again be restored to her position of prestige, God's holy people. After discussing Israel's sinful past, Ezekiel discusses this is what the sovereign Lord says, the nation's future restoration. In chapter 16:21, you see, before dwelling on Israel's future cleansing, Ezekiel reminded the exiles of their past sins, which caused their judgment. When they were in the land, they defiled it by their conduct and actions. This profane was like sounds like a menstrual discharge that rendered a woman ceremonially unclean and defile everything she touched. How did the people defile the land? By bloodshed and adultery. As a result, God removed them from the defiled land. When they scattered, they profiled God's holy name. So other nations viewed the sovereign God through the actions of Israel, thus reproaching his holy name. Therefore, God says he will restore Israel not for their sake, but for his sake of his holy name. Israel had no instructive value for which promoted God to act on her behalf. He will restore the nation because his holy character was at stake. He will show his holiness of his great name. God has shown his justice when he punished Israel for sin. And he would show his grace and faithfulness when he restored her and renew his covenant promise. The means that God will use to show his holiness are explained in these verses. He will first restore the nation physically. He will gather all the countries and bring her back in her own land. Heading God's future program will be the restored nation of Israel. Israel nation will be more than physical. God promised that I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean. I will clean you from all impurities, from all your idols. This is not referred to water baptism. The Old Testament sprinkling of washing with water pictured cleansing from ceremonial defile. Since Israel's sin was a ceremonially impure menstruation, her cleansing was now compared to the ceremony of that purification. The point is that God will purify Israel for her sins This cleansing will be followed the impartation of new life. God will give the converted nation new heart, new spirit. In the place of heart of stone, He will give Israel a heart of flesh. With God's spirit indwelling them, they will be motivated to obey His decree and laws. God's restoration will not simply be an undoing of Israel's sin to bring her to a state of neutrality, but rather it will be involved in possible implanting of new nature in Israel's people that will make them righteous. Jeremiah calls this work of God the new covenant, implanting God's spirit and believing Israel will produce a new relationship between Israel and our God. You will be my people, and I will be your God. God will expand graciousness to His people, being delivered from their sins. They will experience the beautiful provision of the land, including grain, fruit, crops, and without famine. When Israel reflects on God's character and her former nature, she realizes she does not deserve His favor. In fact, she will loathe herself because of her detestable practice. And however, the blackness of her actions will contrast that with the light of God's grace. In the future, when Israel recalls her past action, she will recognize that God had not saved her because of her merit, but God will be doing this not for her own sake, but to magnify His name. When Israel is restored and the land cultivated, people will know that this wasteland will be like the Garden of Eden. Israel's cities formerly in ruins, be fortified to be inhabited. To the surrounding nations of Israel will become a objective lesson of God's grace. They'll be forced knowledge God's sovereign power and relying on people that they would know that I, the Lord, would build that was destroyed. God will cause the nation to increase dramatically. This was considered a sign of God's blessing. Ezekiel compared the swelling population to numerous flocks, sacrificing animals. And Israel then empty and suddenly filled with flocks of people. Chapter 37 illustrates the promise of chapter 36. God had just announced Israel would be restored in their lands under the leadership of David our king. However, this is remote in the light of Israel's present condition. She was dead as a nation. Her land, her king, her temple should have been divided. So God gave two signs to Ezekiel. The flag of restoration confirmation. So first sign was the vision of the dry bones revived. Most Israelites had doubt that God's promise of restoration, their present condition modified against the possibility that being fulfilled. So God stressed the fact of His sovereign power and ability to carry out these remarkable promises. Their fulfillment depended on Him, not on circumstances. Ezekiel reported the report. God translated Ezekiel to a valley full of bones. Then he noticed the bones were very dry, bleached, baked under hot sun. God asked the prophet a remarkable question. Son of man, can these bones live? Was there potential for life in these lifeless frames? Ezekiel knew that humanly speaking it was impossible. But, O sovereign Lord, you know, only God can accomplish such a feat. God then directed Ezekiel to prophesy to these bones. The content of this message was God's promised restoration. I will make breath enter you, and you come to life. Breathe. The same word is translated spirit. Possibly God had in mind Genesis 2:7. In creating man, He transformed Adam into a living being by breathing into nostrils breath of life. When God was referring to wind, physical breath, and the principle of life, the Holy Spirit is concerned. However, these results were obvious. God gave life to these dead bones. Ezekiel was giving this prophecy. It was a remarkable thing. These bones came together, fleshed up, skin covered them, breath entered, and they stood up. So what did the vision refer? God said it was about the nation of Israel, the whole house of Israel. It was taken into captivity. Like unburied skeletons, these people were pinned away, saw no end to their judgment. Our hope is gone, we're cut off. Surviving Israel felt that their national hope had been dashed. Israel had died in the flames of Babylon's attack and had no hope for resurrection. The reviving of the dead bones signifies Israel's national restoration. The vision shows that Israel's new life depended on God's power. Their graves are bringing you back to the land of Israel. Also, when God restored Israel nationally, He will renew them spiritually. He will put in spirit in Israel, the breath of life. Similarly to the Holy Spirit promised in Israel's new covenant. The Israelites residing in Palestine today are not fulfillment of the prophecy, but will be fulfilled when God gathers believing Israel, like the land. When Christ establishes kingdom. And the sign of 2 sticks. Right? Ezekiel's second sign in this chapter visualizes God's restoration. The nation. Ezekiel was told to take 2 sticks of wood and write on them the name of Judah. There, some people say that this Bible in the Book of Mormon. However, this is not possible. After Solomon nation split, there's 2 sticks. It's really referring to 2 kingdoms here. Uniting of the sticks restores the United people. So the 2 kingdoms become one. Unify Israel again. As God's army, He will be their shepherd. They will have an internal. There, God, covenant of peace. Will be a sanctuary. I will be their people, and they will be my people. The promises emphasize the details of God's sanctuary on here. So it just shows that the nation of God's present in the midst of people. So it shows back the temple, the glory. It could be spiritual, literal there. And the attack by Goth, replenish Israel had been trampled. So Goth, most scholars believe Goth represents all the nations and its future. It deals with, the Antichrist kingdom, and some people think it's Russia, but we never know. Israel have been trampled underfoot by their enemies. God will intervene in the future to ensure their safety. He will defeat His people and judge their nations in distant lands. Judgment on the nearby countries have been already cited. Some of the countries mentioned in Ezekiel 38-39 have already been identified as trading with partners who Tyre. Besides those names, the NIV translated as chief. However, older translations in Rosh, head prints, the evidence takes to refer as activist. Never appears any other biblical names. Isaiah 66, but this doubtful should be connected with the Soviet Union, which would be Russia today. What must fit identity, the areas against which Ezekiel prophesied, determine the city does not point to Russia, because the word sounds similar. So Ezekiel had historical places in mind, not modern days. These places must have been located in Ezekiel's time. We're located with Russia now. Suggests that Soviet Union to have been properly the army is far from the north. This is probably the Black Sea. But when would this prophecy be fulfilled? No past events match this prophecy. But this indication has several flaws. Results in Ezekiel do not coincide with events follow the battle of Revelation. Why bury the dead for 7 months after the battle? With the next prophetic event with the resurrection, what would people remain on earth after the battle to burn the weapons of war for 7 years instead of entering immediately into eternity? events, there's no difference on the effects of people. It's different. In Ezekiel, the battle is colossal. God will use to draw Israel to himself. Able to God. So if the battle of Ezekiel 38, 39 is not the end of the millennium, it could be in the beginning. Everyone at the who enters the millennium will be a believer. So demonstrate on here. It seems to place Ezekiel's battle in the tribulation period. Older internal markers indicated it should be the 3.5 first years of the 7-year period. This attack will happen when it's at peace. When this year covenant with the is in fact at the beginning of Daniel's 70 week, she'll be at peace, but after the covenant is broken in the middle, the nation will suffer demonstrate persecution, and they will provide the time to bury the dead, to burn the weapons of war. The battle described by Ezekiel may take place sometime during the first years to tribulation, just before the midpoint. So you'll describe about the remote Israel's remote neighbors, their attack on there. So we're gonna go 38. Then once we get to 30 and then 39, we'll finish the class and I'll go over the review questions. Identification of proper names. God's attack will be demonstrated by God. The Lord said, "I'll turn you around, put hooks in your jaws, wherever the horses, the weapons are literal. God will use Moth and all his allies. Yet the attacking a Moth will attack freely to accomplish his own evil goals. This attack will be against Israel. It'll go against Israel's massive strength. All its purpose is attacking me to plunder and loot. She will be strategically targeted for any power wanting to control Asia and Africa. Moth against Israel will come from all sides. Goth will come from the north, and with him comes his allies in the south. They will advance against Israel like a cloud that covers the land. This attack would be another means of God displaying to the nations to carry sovereign power. And going against Israel, the nations will come to know that God will show himself holy, and as a result, unsuccessful attack will be delivered on her. The defeat of Moth will be crushed by God himself. Are you not the one I spoke in my former days by my servants the prophets of Israel? This causing confusion among interpreters. This is no direct. Writing process means earlier process that predicted invading armies. Associated with cloth. When the armies reach Israel, God's anger will be aroused, and it will cause earthquakes in Israel that will interrupt God's invasion plans and spread fear and confusion. The Paniodium communication between the 4 invading armies will break down. They will attack each other. The man's sword will be against his brother. They shoot indiscriminately at each other. The slaughter of the enemy armies will be hated by natural disasters. The rain will combine with dirt large and will plow the survivors. The invading arms will be totally destroyed by God, having brought against the mountain of Israel. God will weaken them and strike them. Invading armies will be totally destroyed by God, having brought them against the mountains of Israel. God will weaken them and strike them down on the mountains of Israel. This was once mighty army that would be food for birds and wild animals. God will also punish the homelands of the invaders, and I will send fire on Moth and those who live safety in the coastlands. Sending fire implies destruction and military devastation. The nation will spawn. The invasion herself will be destroyed. The coastlands already mentioned several times imply the furthest reaches of the known world. Out of all this, God will teach Israel that He is holy and is not to be profaned by their sins. Also, the nation will see that He is the Holy One in Israel. Okay, so we got a couple more. But hey, brother Anthony. Hello.
Hey,
Will you mind reading the rest of the 39 here? I will do that. I just can't speak with got a sore throat.
sure, no problem.
Yeah, let me
The rest of the commentary?
yeah, the rest of the commentary.
Okay. All right. So, the aftermath of the battle. Those who will come to plunder Israel will themselves be plundered. Israelites will use the fallen soldiers' weapons for fuel for 7 years. Should the weapons of war horses, swords, shields, bows, arrows, clubs, and spears be understood literally, or do they refer figuratively to modern day weapons? The text itself can allow for both interpretations, but the normal meaning of the words would lead to one to see Ezekiel referring to literal horses, etc. With the other worldwide catastrophes evident during the first 3.5 years of Daniel's 70th week, a reversion to more primitive methods of warfare might become possible. Throughout the remainder of the tribulation period and into the beginning of the millennium, as Israel will be burning those weapons, she will not need to cut down trees. This will be an amazing reversal of Gog's fortunes. Israel will plunder those who plundered her and loot those who looted her. After the battle, Israel will also bury Gog's dead. The burials will take place in the valley of those who travel east towards the sea. This translation is somewhat confusing as toward was supplied by the translators, and the east should be translated on the east of. The valley of Gog's army will be buried. It is on the east side of the Dead Sea, in what is today Jordan. The phrase, those who travel east, could be taken as a proper name. It might refer to the mountains of Abiram, east of the Dead Sea, that Israel traversed on her way to the Promised Land. If so, Gog's burial will be in the valley of Abiram, just across from the Dead Sea, from Israel proper in the land of Moab. Yet the burial will be in Israel because Israel controlled that area during the periods of her history. The number of corpses will be so great that the way of travelers will be blocked. The way of travelers could again be translated Abiram. The valley will be clogged with the bodies of soldiers. The name of the valley will be changed to the Valley of Hamon Gog, meaning the Valley of the Hordes of Gog. The number of soldiers killed will be so great that for 7 months the house of Israel will be burying them. Even after the initial cleanup, squads of men will be employed to search the land for additional remains. As they go through the land and one of them sees a human bone, he will set up a marker beside it. Then the gravediggers see the markers. They will take the remains of the valley of Hamon Gog for burial. The operation will be so vast that a town will be set up in the valley at the grave sites to accommodate those cleansing the land. It will be named Hamonoah, a form of the word hordes. Another result of Gog's defeat will be a feast for the wild animals, where God announced that the corpses of those who fall will be food for birds and beasts. God will reverse the roles of animals and people. Usually, people slaughtered and ate sacrificed animals. Here, however, the men of Gog's armies will be sacrifices. They will be eaten by animals. In addressing the birds and animals, God said that at this great sacrifice they will eat flesh and drink blood, as if they were fattened animals from Bashan. Bashan, east of the northeast of the Sea of Kinnereth, later the Sea of Galilee, was known for its fertile land and fat cows. At God's table, the animals will eat their fill of horses and riders, mighty men and soldiers of every kind. The effects of the battle on Israel, two results will come from the battle. The nations will see God's glory. Israel will turn back to her God. God's stunning defeat of Gog will force Israel to acknowledge his power. The defeat of Gog will also hasten God's plans to restore the other Israelites from other nations. Verses 25 to 29 will look ahead to the end of the tribulation when God will restore the nation from her final dispersion. God will bring Jacob back from captivity and will have compassion on all the people of Israel. God will show himself holy through them, acknowledging them as his people. Also, he will pour out his spirit on the house of Israel. The ultimate result of the battle with Gog will be Israel's national repentance and spiritual restoration. This will be fulfilled in the millennial kingdom.
Thank you, brother.
Amen.
Thank you. Here, so you see the summarize on here, which it shows here, chapter 33, 39 dealt with the new life Israel experienced when she's gathered back into her land, restored back into fellowship with God. The 9 chapters will establish a new order that Israel on there, but that will be next time we will get into that. Definitely want to say we're going to review the review questions, but I just want to say, on here we understand that Israel is able to be able to understand that God restores Israel for his sake, so he could demonstrate that he can tear down the nation, but it's all and then he restores it for his name's sake, that he is the one sovereign, he's the one in control. And definitely when they hear that, hey class, we're gonna be doing the review questions here. We're doing 5 questions. Who is the king of Tyre? There was a difference between the ruler of Tyre and king of Tyre. Commentary deals with who is the king of Tyre, which refers to Satan. According to Ezekiel, what type of angels was Satan? Satan, before his fall. Satan before his fall, he was a guardian cherubim. And does chapter 33, 39 deal true or false? Deal with new life back in the land and restore fellowship? True. Does moth represent the final kingdom of the Antichrist in the tribulation period? True. Does Israel horn represent Israel's strength as a nation? And that is true. So keep in mind, remember that, and then we can go from there. Thank you very much. Bye.